Food Systems Leadership Network is a national peer learning community of individuals from across the country working to advance more just, equitable food systems in their communities. And the way we do that is through four main strategies. If you go to the next slide. First around fostering relationships among leaders through encouraging mentoring relationships, offering peer coaching and network building, strengthening leadership capacity through trainings, both online and in person, and supporting organizational effectiveness, inspiring action and collaboration across communities through getting people together in incubators and accelerators. And actually this program today, this series is a new collaboration that's happening through the series of webinars. And then also advancing racial equity individually and systemically. And that's through developing shared analysis, centering equity in our practices, also offering trainings around racial equity, and especially looking to support through our cohorts, majority of Black, Indigenous, and people of color participants in those. And today's call also hits on several of these. The presenters will be sharing tools and practical things that will strengthen capacity. There'll be time to connect with others through rooms. And throughout, we hope that we have centered racial equity. So I'm excited to hand it off. I'll do a quick introduction of our presenters today. So the Syracuse Onondaga Food Systems Alliance was started in 2019. It's a network of food system stakeholders. It is a catalyst for change in the central New York region, specifically based in Syracuse, Onondaga County, and the Onondaga Nation. Their mission is to bring communities together to foster relationships, develop projects, align resources, and advocate for policies to improve the health of their neighbors and the environment. And we're joined today by Mara Ackerman, who serves as the facilitator of SOSFA, convening the organization's 300+ members and supporting the development of the Food Council. Avalon Gupta Verbi serves as the Equity, Inclusion, and Engagement Coordinator, where she leads the Equity, Inclusion, and Accountability Committee. Curtis Waterman, who serves on the advisory board and represents the Onondaga Nation, and Brittany Taylor, who works as a community liaison with SOFSA and also serves as the Community Impact Director for the Central New York, the American Heart Association. So I'm excited to have you all join and bring your expertise and wisdom to the group. I will hand it off to Maura. And also I'll be around for any tech needs. You can chat me or chat any of our presenters.
Great, I think we're actually going to Avalon next.
Thank you, Andrew and Maura. So yeah, before we get into it, I'm just gonna share a little bit of housekeeping. So Andrew, who just spoke from the Wallace Center, is gonna be our tech support for the workshop. So if you're having any technical issues, you can chat him. We also know that this is a big topic with the potential to generate an emotional response. So following a practice we learned from Neighbors of Onondaga Nation, which is a local accomplice organization to Onondaga Nation, we have two emotional support facilitators on the call today. Their names are Sarah Bennett and Jordan Gaines, and they both have emotional support written after their names. Sarah will offer support to white folks and Jordan will offer support to BIPOC folks. We understand that the emotional responses to this topic can be different if your lived experience has been different, and want to offer a safe space for all people. So if you want to step aside and do some grounding exercises or just process a little bit, you can message either of them, whose names will include emotional support at the end, or you can message Andrew to be put in a breakout room together. Kate and Maggie are our ASL interpreters today, and they're both named Kate and Maggie ASL interpretation. If you would like ASL interpretation in any of the breakout rooms, please remain in the breakout room when you are invited into a breakout room so that we can assign an ASL interpreter to accompany you. And finally, this event is being recorded today, and it'll be shared out over the FSLN listserv as well as posted on SOFSA's YouTube page. And the recording will include the presentation and the group activities, but not any of the breakout room conversations. So with that, Maura, we can go on to the next slide. So we wanted to do a land acknowledgement. A land acknowledgement, for those who may not be familiar, is a formal statement that recognizes the unique and enduring relationship that exists between Indigenous peoples and their traditional territories. With that, I want to acknowledge that the land that SOFSA resides on, that we now know as Onondaga County, sits on traditional Haudenosaunee territory. I also want to honor our neighbors, the Onondaga Nation, who have stewarded this land throughout the generations. And if you want to use this opportunity now to chat in your name, any affiliation, your location, and the native territory on which you reside, that'd be awesome. And if you don't know what land you reside on, Maura is going to drop a link into the chat that you can use to find. Oh yeah, it looks like she has, thank you, Maura, that you can use to find what that land is. And then while folks are doing that, I'm just going to run over the agenda, which is the next slide. So right now we are doing our welcome and our introductions in the chat. After that, Brittany is going to go over our group norms, which have been a sort of living document that we've co-created over the course of different SOFSA events, definitely informed by our participation in these FSLN spaces. And after Brittany shares the group norms, we're going to go into a speed networking session where we can get a chance to get to know each other a little bit more. We'll then take a quick bio break, which you can go grab a snack, run to the bathroom, and then return for SOFSA's presentation about our own journey. Do some open Q&A, and then do some peer sharing in breakout rooms where you'll have the opportunity to self-select a breakout room. And then come back together for a group activity and some space for gratitude. So Brittany, yeah, if you want to go ahead and take it away with the group norms.
Thank you so much, Avalon. Thank you everyone for joining us today. So these are some of our group norms. So the main session of this meeting is being recorded for those unable to attend. Small group conversations in breakout rooms are not recorded. For accommodations, instructions to turn on closed captioning are being chatted to everyone now. If there are other accommodations that would help you to participate more fully in SOFSA meetings, please reach out to Avalon. For preparation, please review any materials circulated prior to the meeting so that you can participate fully. For self-care, your snacks and drinks are welcome on screen if you are comfortable. If you're enjoying something special, especially anything local, feel free to share with the group over chat. Stretch when you need to, keep your camera on when you can, and turn it off when you need a break. And for background noises, we'll be respectfully keeping everyone on mute for the large group portion so it's easier for everyone to hear. In small groups, please do unmute yourself if you are able. Ask questions. Please feel free to use the chat box or use the raise hand function to ask a question. Those on the phone can dial *6 to unmute themselves to ask questions. Be sure to ask questions of presenters and one another to enable opportunities for clarification and to avoid making assumptions. For balance and participation, please speak and actively listen, especially in the small group conversation. Make sure everyone has equal opportunity to share their thoughts, concerns, and questions. Accept non-disclosure. We may not get to all questions or even complete our planned agenda at every meeting, but we'll always do our best to ensure timely follow-up on lingering items. You can help our staff by reaching out to us if there's anything you're waiting on from us. Shared accountability. We agree to support one another to maintain these guidelines and our work together. If harm is caused, we will apologize, take accountability, and center the needs of the person who has been harmed. In respecting confidentiality, what is discussed in our breakout room sessions will stay in those breakout sessions if the participant wishes. And avoid triggering language. We will avoid using specific numbers, triggering oppressive language, and talk of trauma that could be triggering to others. And I believe with that, we are going to jump into our speed network.
SAFSA owes a huge debt of gratitude to one of our co-founders, Evan Weissman, who passed away suddenly in April of 2020. Evan enshrined within us and our nascent Food Council a deep justice orientation right from its beginning. In addition to being a founding member of SAFSA and one of its early visionaries, Evan was a beloved professor of food studies at Syracuse University. And I just want to mention Nelson Gaudet is on the call, and they were part of SAFSA for a long time and one of Evan's students. Avalon was also the inaugural recipient of the Evan Weissman Memorial Scholarship at Syracuse University. So his legacy lives on in lots and lots of different ways and lots of different people. At Syracuse University, his scholar activism focused on issues of food justice and urban agriculture. And prior to his passing, Evan had applied for a faculty fellowship with the Syracuse University Lender Center for Social Justice. His intent with that fellowship was to support SAFSA's ongoing development and to ensure a solid foundation rooted in justice. Evan's friend and colleague, as well as one of our SAFSA advisory board members, Janelle Robinson, stewarded the fellowship in Evan's absence. The Lender Fellowship, alongside funding from the USDA Regional Food Systems Partnership Program, provided dedicated resources to help SAFSA identify best practices for building a food council inclusive of historically marginalized participants, provided space for knowledge sharing between researchers, students, and community members, and fundamentally shaped SAFSA's future direction. Without Evan and the doctrine he left as a legacy and a roadmap for our work, much of what we're about to share about our efforts over the past 2 years and what Evan called humble and productive mistake making would not have happened. And with that, I'm going to turn things over to Curtis Waterman to kick us off by sharing a bit more about SAFSA's mission and values and the ideals that Evan helped to weave into all of us.
Well, thank you, Maura. My name is Curtis Waterman, and I grew up and reside on the Onondaga Nation. And Evan did come to the nation to ask for representation, or as you'll hear, he has expressed that every person should have access to healthy food that they love. And our mission statement, there are certain words in there that kind of get to what Evan was talking about. For example, SOFSA is a network of food system stakeholders and a catalyst for change. That catalyst for change is very important. And our mission is to strengthen our food system so that it works for all people in Onondaga County and Syracuse. And we bring communities together to foster relationships. We need to talk to one another to find out what certain problems and what all problems are and what successes are there. And in addition to our mission, SOFSA is deeply committed to transformative change. Again, a means of got to change to make things better. And it aims to embed these values at every level of our work. And our equity justice statement, it articulates these values in its central piece of our county's bylaws and its day-to-day operations. And I just kind of want to, again, read the very first statement of our equity justice statement. And it says, we at SOFSA believe in food sovereignty. We want to live in a world where every person has access to healthy food that they love. There's a lot that goes into that particular statement, and it is explained in the equity statement as you read it. The barriers standing between us and the visions are high, and their foundations are systemic. Which basically means they're kind of concrete in a way, and to get out of that systemic mindset, you have to think differently. You have to think in your own space. What can I change in my own space to make things better? And make things better for future generations. And within the city Syracuse limits, many neighborhoods suffer under man-made famines. Basically, their access to fresh food is artificially constrained by the city's deficient public transit systems. An example. The people who feel these systemic failures most acutely belong to the same groups that have been marginalized by our dominant systems throughout history. Black people, indigenous people in particular, as I am witness. I grew up knowing that. And there can be no sovereignty without first enacting justice. And we'll find out more about that. Again, action needs to happen. And while we work to revolutionize policies and change attitudes in the long and medium term, we must also work alongside our vulnerable neighbors in the now to guarantee them the autonomy and food security that they've been solely missing. And again, let's get to know the people. Get to know who's on the north side of Syracuse. Get to know who's on the south side, who's on the southwest side. You got to get to know those people. And to help keep up SOFSA's commitment to these efforts, we will maintain a council of paid community liaisons, each a member of a historically marginalized group in our service area. Among that council's powers will be the ability to recommend new members to the advisory board in the interest of maintaining and or expanding geographic, economic, demographic, and professional diversity in its composition. In other words, people of all colors. Regardless of that composition, SOFSA's advisory board will keep itself educated on issues of social justice and updated on related best practices. Within SOFSA, we enact different ideas through training. So that's one reason also that I am part of SOFSA, is that training aspect of making myself better to know how to deal with other people and they say foster relationships. And it's the Equity, Inclusion, Accountability Committee will also maintain social groups for self-identified members of different historically marginalized groups, where SOFSA members can socialize with others who share their experiences. Again, it's meeting people, getting to know problems by going to their neighborhoods. So that's kind of what I wanted to say and what I wanted to bring to this Zoom. So I'd like to thank you for your time.
Thank you, Curtis. So what Curtis sort of just set the stage for is sort of the internal basis that we worked on building. And this internal basis that would then sort of affect these different, not necessarily programmatic, but these different initiatives within SOFSA that we have utilized to build equity and justice into the organization. And so I'm going to share a little bit about our educational events, which Curtis mentioned briefly. So this has been a really key part of our racial justice work. The first training we did was Soul Fire Farms, Uprooting Racism in the Food System training, which it was just an incredible kind of overview of the history of the food system in the United States. This was planned with the help of the Lender Fellows through Syracuse University, and also Nelson Gade, who is a food studies master's program alum who's on the call. So shout out to Nelson. And it was sort of pitched as an internal training for the SOFSA advisory board. And it was born out of the awareness that we needed to start somewhere and grow from there. I think this was really in response to the 2020 racial justice uprisings that affected the whole of the United States. And the knowledge that we could build in racial justice from the ground up. So there were folks from all over the country who attended this. SOFSA advisory board members and staff attended as well, and were able to invite members of their own organization. The next training that we did later that year was called Witness to Injustice, and it is facilitated by a local organization that I actually mentioned earlier that gave us the idea for emotional support facilitators called Neighbors of Onondaga Nation. And Curtis was also one of the facilitators for this training. And this is sort of an interactive educational experience about the history of Indigenous peoples in the US, and it has a focus on the Haudenosaunee Confederacy nations, which Onondaga, the land that SOFSA covers, resides on. And this expanded to include both advisory board members as well as other community members who wanted to participate. And then the third and most recent event was this spring. And it was completely organized by SOFSA and SOFSA affiliates, other community members. And it was the first educational event to be facilitated by us. And it was a moderated panel of 4 experts who discussed fat phobia, weight stigma, and healthcare and food justice. Specifically, oftentimes the racial history of fat phobia in the United States. So following the moderated panel, there were breakout rooms and questions and answers. I think with all of these educational events, we were kind of limited by the Zoom platform, and we received feedback that oftentimes, especially with like the Health Beyond Weight event, these sorts of panel events can come off as sort of academic and inaccessible to people. And so, that is like incredibly valuable feedback that we've received, and we've definitely been working on a process of internalizing that and figuring out how we can continue to host these events and do this participatory education work in ways that are accessible to everybody. And I also wanted to note that all of these educational events gave us these different tools. The Soulfire Farm, besides giving us just like an incredible in-depth history, also gave us a lot of different tools and toolkits that we've utilized in building our equity framework, including a rubric for measuring organizational progress that has been super useful. Witness to Injustice, besides again offering us this invaluable education, brought in the idea of emotional support facilitators for heavy topics. And then with the Health Beyond Weight event, we were able to actually co-create our group norms with a group of folks beforehand, before the event took place, and created some space for us to keep thinking about how those group norms can be a living document. So yeah, moving forward, we're really excited to continue this educational work. This event today is part of that, expanding out of our sort of local, regional vantage point to be a little bit more national. It's really exciting. You can go on to the next slide, Maura. The other initiative that I'm going to briefly chat about is our Affinity group spaces. So we have one for BIPOC folks and one for LGBTQ plus folks. And so I have a great personal story about this. I originally got involved with SOFSA through the Lender Fellowship, which I mentioned previously, but I really decided that I wanted to dig into this organization because I was attending the monthly BIPOC gatherings and getting an opportunity to connect with BIPOC folks in this organization. And for instance, I ran into a housing crisis a few months after moving to Syracuse, and I was able to find housing through someone I connected with in that group. And so these showed me that I could trust SOFSA and that there was always going to be a place there to connect safely about my experience as a brown person, someone working in food systems work. And so moving forward, and those were initially on Zoom when I first moved here in 2021, but moving forward, we've moved these to be in person and have had great success in creating, at minimum, a space where SOFSA's employees can gather, our interns, our community liaisons, our employees or the people who are like deeply connected to the organization, and at maximum similar pipelines to create engagement for folks like the one that I sort of felt myself going through. So I think in the future, something perhaps a challenge is a strong word, but something that we are working on together is finding ways to convey the importance of these spaces and the importance of this work to our organization, regardless of a way of them functioning in a way that generates sort of solid metrics. You know, I mean, they do pull people in, but people come in and out as they have capacity. And so conveying the importance of something that doesn't necessarily have like tangible numbers associated with it is something that we will continue to work on. But in the meantime, it's a great space to be in once a month. Super fun. And yeah, I'll pass it off to Brittany to talk about the community liaisons program.
Yeah, so the community liaisons, how we function in the community is really just by connecting with other smaller groups and bringing them into the conversations around SOFSA and things that are important to them. So what that really looks like is through storytelling and just listening. So it's making connections and conversations. Originally, we envisioned like being able to go to public markets and hear stories. But what we really learned is some of these conversations can be really intimate. So you really want to do them in smaller, calmer environments. So the picture on the left is from the Syracuse Regional Market. And then on the right, Avalon and I had the opportunity to meet with these students from Urban Delights, which is a community group in Syracuse that focuses on community farming. So they have community farms throughout the city. And then they take that produce and then they sell it. So it teaches them some like entrepreneurship and, you know, like business acumen, but also really about how to grow their own things. And the conversations that we have are about just their experiences with food, you know, like what are your favorite foods? What are the foods that are common to your family? How does your family feel about eating healthier foods or fruits and vegetables? What are some fruits and vegetables that you may not have ever come into contact had it not been for your experience with Urban Delights? And it really is a great opportunity just to hear different perspectives along an age spectrum, along a race spectrum, about the experiences of food in Syracuse. My work at SOFSA started through a role that I was previously in as a director at Liberty Resources. I came across this as we were doing some food security work through the pandemic. We were handing out food boxes every 2 weeks in one of Syracuse food deserts. And what was a great opportunity for me was just, you know, we were taking demographic information and seeing that people were coming from all over. So Syracuse is the city, but then we have a lot of suburbs outside and we have a lot of rural areas outside. And seeing that the need expanded past just the city of Syracuse, especially during COVID, was very eye-opening for me and how people are experiencing food. And so I'm really connected to this work. I really feel one of the committees that I'm on is the Food is Medicine. And I feel very passionately about how our food impacts our health and how spreading more awareness and education around how, you know, making those small decisions about the food that we eat or the access that individuals have strongly impacts their cardiovascular health. For me, you know, I grew up in a Southern household. My grandmother was from North Carolina and Virginia. So we had a lot of beans, we had a lot of fried foods, we had a lot of mac and cheese. And over the years, you know, I saw how that impacted her. She had arthritis and diabetes and high blood pressure and heart disease. And I knew that although these things were delicious, it wasn't doing really great things for our body. So really working with SOFSA and spreading the information around health and wellness and how we can make healthier food decisions, or just having access and changing, having opportunities to try new things has been really important to me. One of the things that happened during a lesson that we presented, where we made a salad with a fresh avocado, and Mr. Freddie, he's like in his 70s. He's an older Black gentleman. And he says, you know, Dr. Oz always has these avocados and he always says how good they are for you, but I didn't know how to pick them at the store and I didn't know how to cut it. And it was just, you know, just a 5-minute introduction changed his access and availability and his taste palette to be able to incorporate something healthy. And so just those small little wins like that are the things that SALSA continues to do in the community, and it's really important. The last thing that I'll share is just some of the challenges that we face. So as I said, we really learned that some of these conversations were very intimate, and having them in large areas where it was loud was very difficult. The other thing too, of course, everyone has felt the impacts of COVID. So the in and out of being able to have public events or be in public spaces and then drawing back and feeling uncomfortable with that, that was something that we faced. And now I feel as though we really are in the process of determining our goals and having more of these listening sessions and gathering more stories so we can see exactly how we can continue to bring and amplify community voices across our city. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Brittany. So I'm going to talk about 2 other facets of the work that we've been doing that's more sort of internally organizationally focused. So I think, as we mentioned, SAFSA participated in FSLN's organizational change for racial justice cohort last summer and has been engaged in the community of practice around that work since. And so one of the things on the organizational side that we have been working towards is building an organization that serves as an exemplar of what an equitable workplace can be, and how we center individuals and one another in the process of designing what that might look like. So we began by establishing from our Equity, Inclusion, and Accountability Committee an equitable workplace subgroup that was focused on developing a handbook and a set of policies as we work to transition our staff from independent contractors to employee status. So for those of you who are unfamiliar, this is sort of like organizational technical speak, but from like 1099 contractors reclassifying folks as W-2 employees and the protections that employees do have, and potentially adding some benefits. Obviously, we're a small organization with not a huge budget, so the whole range of benefits wouldn't be available to our employees, but trying to do the best by them that we possibly could. And so the goal of these internal documents was really to lay out our culture, to set these values, which you see here, that were generated by that equitable workplace subgroup. Our hiring practices, how we might address conflict within the workplace and within the organization writ large, and just really work towards, again, that organizational maturity factor of having a sustainable future for our network. A second goal of all of this work was to advance within our network of partners a potential roadmap, right, for what equitable employee policies might look like, and to offer as stepwise within that action plan and the self-reflection rubric that Avalon mentioned, sort of how we might offer up some of these policies as a menu to our network of organizations to potentially adopt over time. So it was really a collaborative process, and Avalon and I, as the primary staff people, really supported the working group with regular check-ins, and Avalon's work focused on the shared values and guidelines on conflict resolution and developing a code of ethics. And my work focused on the more of the minutia side, but really trying to bring a racial justice lens to general employment, hiring, and recruitment. We have a number of resources that were really, really helpful in the process of developing our draft handbook, all of which we'll share with you. At the end of today's session, we have a big resource document that we'll both share as part of the presentation, and I'm hoping that the FSLN team can also circulate to attendees after. So a challenge was that when we presented this work to the advisory board of SAFSA, we were really presented with an explicit example of, why critical self-reflexivity is so core to an organization that is multiracial and does have, more than 50% representation from white folks in positions of leadership. So instead of immediately implementing the handbook, the document became an opportunity for a lot of organizational learning, self-reflection, and deeper analysis of where we are starting from and where we might move towards. We have still not fully implemented the handbook and are hoping to do that by the end of 2022, and really still trying to figure out how to center justice. But I think this has been a real challenge of really pulling back the curtain on what this looks like, and also how it reflects on folks' home institutions and their own policies. And it's been a moment of a lot of reflection and challenge. We learned together that there is an art to balancing the interests of sustaining an organization, of supporting workers, and creating internal documents that could have the possibility of being externally facing as well. Thinking a little bit about what transparency looks like, what legal requirements are there around transparency, and how we can draw within the lines, but also really recognize how we have the opportunity to challenge and develop together a creative and imaginative new paradigm for what employment practices can look like. So we also learned important lessons about co-designing systems for communication between, at every level, with the community liaisons, with staff, with advisory board members, and with the stakeholders writ large. We worked on a lot of figuring out how we can align our values and how to build trust and put one another first as humans and as individuals with history and stories that build who we are, so that we ensure that solid foundation in our relational components. So Curtis talked a lot about the sort of personal responsibility of putting one another first and building those relationships as the basis for how we operate together, and thinking about collaboration over sort of the white supremacy culture, capitalist ideal of a more competitive individual or organizational approach. So this has been a big area of learning for us, and it's ongoing. And related to that, sorry, this is a little blurrier than I intended, but this graphic just really represents a little bit about what I'm saying. This is not our own graphic, just one that I think speaks to the balancing act of really trying to generate a new way of governing. And it's one of the reasons that I'm really excited that today's workshop is actually part of a series. And in a few weeks, folks will have the opportunity to learn from the San Diego Food Policy Alliance about their work around governance and really lifting up community voices. So we'll be learning together about how to operationalize some of the challenges that I'll speak about now. And we're really in the throes of this, of thinking through our evolution from our first iteration of a governance structure, which is outlined in the bylaws, which discussed a wholly non-hierarchical advisory board structure where each individual had a lens through which they were viewing the work, which also had the role of the Council of Community Liaisons as sort of a check and balance and an enrollment body for the advisory board itself. And for a number of reasons, some of which Brittany alluded to, the Council of Community Liaisons has not taken shape that way. We've recognized a number of challenges with the fully non-hierarchical flat structure for an advisory board of 14 members. And we're really working towards trying to imagine, how do we balance the need for a degree of efficiency in the nonprofit capitalist world in which we are all constrained for the time being? How do we balance that with the highest possible participatory engagement of members of our community? And how can that bi-directional work and transparent work really lead to the best possible decision making? So we're also thinking about how we can be guided by the values that we've articulated together to formulate decision-making structures, versus adopting a sort of business as usual approach without any critical reflection. We're thinking a lot about how we better integrate the community liaison's role and how do we shape that moving forward. And really thinking through, governance is ultimately about who decides and how those decision-making processes unfold. And so thinking about the roles of staff, advisory board members, community liaisons, and the membership at large in the decision-making process. So we're also really dealing with what is our personal role. Curtis challenged me on this in one of our prep conversations, that I use a lot of we and or our language when talking about SAFSA, and I do believe in that as a coalition. And yet, right, each of us has a personal contribution to the collective, and we need to both honor the collective as a whole, but also how we contribute to its structure and function, and how we hold personal responsibility and how we hold one another to account in that process. So really in this collective wayfinding, we're deeply in the throes of figuring this out together. So I'll be curious in the breakout sessions to see what conversations might come up and what you all are learning along the way, as well as learning in this second iteration of the collective wayfinding series about what San Diego has been up to. All right, I think with that, we're gonna open the floor for Q&A. And I personally like to not have screen share so that we can see more faces as we do that. But if folks want to use the raise hand function, you can use the chat function. That's really helpful to sort of ping off the questions. Thanks, everybody. Eloy, is that how you pronounce your name? I apologize.
Oh no, it's Eloy.
Eloy, I apologize. Thank you.
You're all good.
Go right ahead.
I just wanted to bring up one of the issues that my organization has been having, the Whatcom Health Department. It's county health department. A lot of these institutions are based in a lot of ways. They have ingrained white supremacy in them. So how to tackle that and then build racial equity tools in that, while also having to come up from my own position from the bottom up and try to convince people at higher positions to take that into effect. I don't know if there's any experience with that, but I know that's stuff that we've been struggling with on our side. Not sure how to pose that necessarily as a question, but I don't know, any experience or any like ways of potentially tackling that, or ways of connecting with people to be able to advance that racial equity work, I guess.
I don't know that I have an answer, but I guess I'm actually just thinking about info session I was in right before we met up to start this workshop with this organization called AORTA, AORTA, and it they were talking about like pathways, and so I guess my question for you is if there are pathways within the Whatcom County. Is that, I'm not sure.
Whatcom, you're good.
Whatcom, okay. Like, are there pathways for furthering that already exist within your institution? Like, is there somebody or a department or somebody who holds some sort of role that is specifically related to I mean, even like DEI, you know, that's sort of like, we have this understanding that like doesn't push it for far enough, but you know, it could be like the place to start, perhaps, and then like from there you can kind of push for some sort of change.
Great, thank you. That's very helpful.
Yeah, and just one follow-up that I wanted to share. So prior to moving to Syracuse, I actually lived in Boston and worked for the health department for the city of Boston. I'll throw in the chat, but they were among the first health departments in the country to really advance a health equity and racial justice training across their workforce. It was a required 2 full workday training. And there were full-time staff in that department who offered that training on an ongoing basis. So everyone from, you know, the folks who were really, you know, already ensconced in the like public health speak around the importance of health equity, all the way to the folks who were EMTs and maybe didn't have that lens to begin with, were required to complete this training, and then there were follow-up opportunities. So there are several health departments throughout the country that are advancing that kind of work. So I just wanted to offer that up as like a specific model, since I do think health departments are a bit unique in that way.
Yeah, you could probably understand where I'm coming from in terms
Absolutely.
of all of that. I appreciate that. I'll look into it. Thank you so much.
Other questions? David, go right ahead.
Hey, thank you. I'm just curious in terms of when you're doing your critical self-reflexivity on different operational things, and especially with doing like the value settings for your organization. How did you reach out to people who generally haven't had a voice in the past, and B, get them to trust you enough to have that engagement so you could have an open and honest conversation that they would be able to tell you in real flat terms, you know, what they think of your value systems or your organizational behaviors?
I can answer. So I love, that's a fabulous question, and definitely one that we are still working on. I think like from the point or that timeline that Brittany sort of shared of building the community liaison council to where we are now, which is doing these community listening sessions, to ideas that Curtis has had lately about developing our values through conversations with different communities about what are some of their cultural values that they hold. Like all of those elements, bringing them all together like is definitely challenging. I think the idea with the community liaisons is that like you have people like Brittany and we have a handful of other like really awesome community liaisons who have these like really deep community connections and are like leaders and have these networks of people that they know and talk to. And it's like through conversation and connection with those people and offering them like, you know, not necessarily like a full-time position at SOFSA, but a stipended position at SOFSA, like has allowed to build some sort of trust. And maybe Brittany, I mean, I don't want to like put words in your mouth too, because you are the community liaison, but I think like identifying people who are like leaders within their community and like building trust and rapport and like having real conversations. I mean, I think COVID has made things difficult, but like face-to-face and one-on-one is like, I think, such an important part of like real organizing. And once you start to build those relationships, then like the trust comes after, and then you can have those like deeper conversations where you are developing based off of what people are sharing with you.
Yeah, Evelyn, I would add, definitely, I don't do the work for the stipend, but it definitely helps because it demonstrates also a commitment to understanding that some of this work is work. You know, sharing my experiences is of value, and it's not just to be expected of me because I am a Black woman. So that's one thing. And then the second thing too is really establishing those group norms and establishing that these are safe spaces to have conversations, and the intent of conversations, and dealing with the consequences of conversations, right? Like how someone can be offended, and providing things like having an emotional support individual on the call for people that may feel uncomfortable about some of the things that are said. So of course you can't do that in the office every single day. But I think that making sure that you establish a framework around conversation, that these are learning experiences and these are open spaces, definitely helps to make everyone feel more comfortable to share their true experiences.
That's incredible, Brittany, how you put that. May I ask you a quick follow-up? How do you talk to funders about that conversation, that having those conversations is work? It's not just, oh, well, we're here to help you, so you should give us the information that you have. That's one place where we're struggling with convincing members of our board, for example, that we should pay people to participate in group activities and conversations in safe spaces.
Yeah, I can take that one because I interface with funders a lot. So I think it is a challenge. There's a lot of national dialogue around this currently, around changing the tenor of conversations with the philanthropic community and with funders about lifting up the importance of community voice and the emotional labor that it truly is, and compensating for that. I think a couple of resources I'd recommend, and Evelyn, if you can throw these in while I continue to speak, I would really follow the work of community-centric fundraising, which is a BIPOC-led group. They share incredible content on social media and their blog about sort of transformative practices, and have a set of principles that really live out values in how we talk about, talk with funders. I will say that this round of community liaisons has been funded by the USDA. And so I think that they have actually come a really long way in their willingness to lift up community voice. So I want to challenge the assumption that every funder is behind the dime. I think that some might meet you where you are a little bit unexpectedly. And certainly some have a long way to go. There's an article that came out, I think they actually reposted it, but it was longer ago, about models of abundance versus scarcity in fundraising, and really thinking collectively about how we work together and work with funders. I think that's been a challenge to communicate, for us to communicate to local foundations, right, who are used to sort of nonprofits competing with one another for limited funds as opposed to collaborating. We get asked a lot, like, well, when will you incorporate as your own 501c3? And we're like, actually, we might not. It actually might serve us to be a collaborative incorporation with another small nonprofit for a longer term. If and when it doesn't work, maybe we'll separate, maybe we won't. But for the time being, it really serves both organizations to have the efficiencies. And so there's a lot of funder education that takes a long time, and sometimes can't happen in the 1,000-character limit of the box. And so trying to develop the relationships outside of grant applications exclusively, so that you could have those important conversations and have the background documentation that you add as an optional attachment or other things like that as ways to communicate why this is so important. Does that answer your question, David?
That's brilliantly insightful. Thank you.
Okay. We haven't cracked the code entirely, but it's definitely part of the work, I would say. I'll grab that abundance versus scarcity article and put that in the resources too. I missed that one. It will be compiled. Any other questions before we go to breakout room? We have time for one more probably. Well, I actually, if Curtis has any closing thoughts before we go to breakout room, I don't know if you do, on any of the questions. We didn't point to you. I don't want to put you on the spot though.
Well, I did have some closing thoughts, and it kind of goes back to the ground up idea. And it kind of goes back to what I was saying earlier when I gave the introduction of meeting people, meeting the community to find out what their problems are. And this kind of goes to the our closer north side neighborhood, the Bhutanese people, the Vietnamese people. They are a fish eating culture, and they're living next to an Onondaga lake, which is a place where you should not be eating any fish. So they need to, in a sense, either change their cultural habits or, I'm not sure that's the problem. That's why we're talking to them. But the idea is to go to them. They have cultural meetings and cultural events, and I feel like our liaisons should go to those events and maybe at some point kind of find out again their cultural values, conversations along those lines that could be brought back to COFSA. And that's just one neighborhood where that could happen. So again, it goes back to meeting the people, start with your neighbors, whoever is next to you. Go to them, talk to them. So I guess I was looking for the young lady who said she was from that area on the north side. I don't see her name anymore, but okay. Brittany certainly has done a good job with her neighborhood. One thought would be a rotating cultural liaison for different neighborhoods. There she is, Sarah. She's the one I was talking about. Go to them neighborhoods whenever they have something culturally going on and basically talking to them. That's it.
Great. Thanks, Curtis. All right. Well, I will share the slides again, and Evelyn, you can give instructions for breakout rooms. Does that work? Yeah, great. This goes to the earlier question, but just thinking about next steps for folks to consider taking away and like from today and the menu of options that you might think about as, again, those first steps in incorporating some of the things we've talked about. So speaking with local funders about supporting collective learning and embedding justice-oriented activities in your grant budgets. So I talked earlier about community-centric fundraising, but making space in grant budgets to, among your activities that might be outcome-oriented, really embedding some of the activities that we've talked about today. Affinity groups are very inexpensive to run. They're time consuming, As Avalon will tell you, and I can tell you from running the LGBTQ plus group, but they are inexpensive in terms of resources. So really important pieces to think about. I think seeking out BIPOC-led organizations locally to see if there are regionally relevant training. So thinking about the Witness to Injustice training that spoke about the history of our region's land and territory, and the culturally relevant local practices and the environmentally relevant pieces of our local community. So if those are pieces that are available to you, I really encourage you to seek those out. Fairly compensate BIPOC trainers and authors, as well as community members for the labor that goes into all of this work. And publicizing opportunities to organizational stakeholders. So not only holding them internally, but also externally, and thinking about the folks who have leadership and power and making sure that there's exposure to training. And retaining a people-first approach to continual collaborative engagement and embracing humble mistake-making. I'm going to share the resources and reading on various topics that we covered today. And we'll continue to populate this as we see new things. And if you have things that you want to add, I encourage you to email us. I actually didn't put our emails in this slide. So Avalon, if you could plug those.
I got a question.
Yes.
Yeah, like I heard what you said that it's rarely inexpensive, but in my mind, I'm kind of like I don't know where the line draws, because when we're working in community spaces, it's this, academic and institutional space of like how you get funding. And then it's the actual people who actually live within the space where it's really real, because I work in, I'm a designer who works within the food systems. And so when it comes to food systems, farmers are like my directive of like who I support and galvanize and amplify. And time is very important to the work that they do. And so I wouldn't look at like if people want their voice within spaces, the compensation isn't relatively inexpensive. It is at price, because they're taken away from their everyday revenue of how they incorporate their creative practice, because it's a creative practice,
right
into the space. So when someone was like, we need farmers, I was like, okay, so how much you willing to pay? Because they're experts in their fields, and they're experts for a reason, because it's a creative practice. They creatively do things every single freaking day. Outside what you think they do, they have to be extremely creative in their thinking tools and their resources to be able to produce the food that provides for us. And like anybody who's growing, even if it's a plant, there's a creative process behind that, and you need to pay for it. And so like, where is this line about verbiage when it comes to like inexpensive? I just wouldn't use that term, and I'm not trying to hone on it either.
No, I think this is a really valid point. And I was using inexpensive in relation to the affinity groups, I guess, in the way we operate them, which is like more social spaces and outside of working hours, which I know is not everyone's working hours, but so we don't compensate people for participation in affinity groups. We do compensate people for contributing to our mission-oriented work, including farmers. And we are always writing in compensation for individuals throughout our community and throughout the different food system sectors for their participation in the work. But totally hear you about that when people who are not, who then potentially, lose income by participating in these spaces are not compensated. That's really problematic. All right, I hope that's helpful in terms of clarifying. I don't know exactly, but so I don't know that I think that this is a piece of humble mistake making, and continuing to iterate is trying to think through exactly how to do this and do this well and do this in a way that values people's time, energy, and wisdom. For us in all of our grant budgeting, which I agree is very problematic in terms of its focus on folks who can write in a particular style in a particular way. We are also supporting lots of community-based organizations in doing their grant writing. So where there is expertise in your network, again, that goes to the sharing of abundance. All of our skill sets should be shared among the network to make things happen and make things work for the greater good. And so I think also I hope there are people locally who might also be willing to work alongside you in fundraising efforts. So in terms of continuing the conversation, we're almost at time. So I just wanted to reiterate to folks that the collective wayfinding part 2 of this series is going to be with San Diego Food Systems Alliance on August 25th, which is a Thursday, if I'm remembering correctly. I have the 1 to 3 p.m. Eastern time. I am terrible with other time zones, so if you're able to convert for me, I appreciate it. And that link, Evelyn, could you put that in the chat, please? Thank you. And then on September 8th, a couple of weeks later, we're actually going to do a joint virtual office hours. That'll just be a sort of informal opportunity to ask questions that perhaps have percolated for you over the course of being at both of these webinars, or in the intervening weeks, and an opportunity to chat more. And so I think with that, I'm going to invite Avalon back to close us out.
Thank you, Maura, and thanks everyone for all your questions and engagement. So just to close out this beautiful workshop today, we wanted to invite people to engage in some sort of movement that they feel embodies what you learned today and captures how you might carry it back to your own spaces. So this could really just be like a silly dance move or a meditative stretch or just a gesture with your hands or with your face. And you can be on camera or you can be off camera, whatever you feel comfortable with. But the idea is to just really bodily, carry what we discussed today back to your own spaces. So yeah. With
I'm
that,
gonna stop the share so that we can see one another as we sign off in this way. All right, any closing words from the Wallace Center team?
Just gratitude. Thank you all so much for sharing, bringing staff and partners in, and just the way that you put this together also shows your centering of racial equity. So thank you for kicking off the series in a great way.
Thanks for having us. Really appreciate it.
yeah, thank you all.